Hello, everyone. I see it's such a full room today. Very, very glad to be seeing a lot of your faces. Some of them I hadn't seen in a while, or some of your names at least. Welcome to today's session. I will be facilitating the whole session today. I'm very, very excited for us all to be walking through. Just before we continue going all the way, can someone just maybe thumbs up to make sure that I'm audible and that everyone can hear me properly? Thank you, Maxine. Thank you very much. Thank you, Palesa, Siabonga. Thank you guys so much. So it means we are good to go. I see so many people have already started doing it in the chat. So feel free to be doing the same thing, sort of just putting your name there and telling us where you're from. If you are new here, it's your first time joining. My name is Mitchelle, and I work with the education team at the African Climate Alliance. And we run these workshops. We try as much as possible to do it once every month or every other month, where we build climate literacy from the basics. That's why they're called Back2Basics workshops, because we literally go back to basics. Like today's session, we're looking at building capacity for climate in the global south. And so we are going to be breaking down what that means, right? So what is capacity for community-driven solutions? What is the global south? Who is the global south? So very, very excited for us all to be going through this session today. Just a couple of things. Please make sure that you are on mute, unless, of course, you're speaking. So please make sure that you've muted yourself unless you're speaking. If you do have a question, you raise your hand or you pop it in the chat. I will see all of that. All right. I think that we can get started. And so can everyone see my screen? Just that whole thumbs up situation again would be great. Can we all see my screen? I hope we can, so that we can properly get started. All right, cool. So in today's session, we're going to be looking at building capacity for community-driven climate solutions. We want to know what this is. We're going to do a case study at the end to help us sort of visualize what this community-driven climate solution really is, right? So that is the question. And I take it most of us have come in today to try and figure out what this is, try and figure out how we can implement it ourselves as well. And that's what we're going to be exploring. So that's our Back to Basics workshops topic for today. We always like to start with a disclaimer so that everyone understands that even though we're going sort of in depth with some of these topics, we're not exhausting them. We're not doing all that we could with all of these topics. So it's almost like ideas that a lot of the stuff that's going to come up can and should be workshopped and even discussed further, as in beyond what we're just doing here today. So do extensive research after the workshop, or reach out to us and ask us questions. We are always happy to respond to questions related to the work. So because we are simply still starting, and I know there might be a few new faces in the space, how are you entering the new month? If 2024 was a food, what would it be and why? I will just give one moment to everyone in the chat to, if you'd like, pop it in the chat. Pop it in the chat. How are you entering the new month? And if 2024 was a food for you, what would it be and why? Maybe not. Because I'm entering the new month energized for the second quarter of 2024. And so far, if 2024 was a food for me, It would most probably be pasta. I see Thomas says green beans. I would be so interested to know why it would be green beans for you. All right, so I'll just wait for people to pop it in the chat. I see more people are speaking to that. Brown rice, not easy but sustaining. Yes, I can feel that, and we're only in end of March, so cool. As we move along, I will be reading of that. It's okra, days fast approaching. There's lemon, tapia. You see, all of this, I'm feeling it. Thomas comes back and says green beans because we're all trying to go green. And then I see someone say a kiwi fruit slept on, but actually delicious. Grilled chicken, brown bread, great short and quick burst of fruitiness. Amazing. I mean, incredible answers there. Absolutely amazing. So I'm just gonna, oh my goodness, oh, these are really great answers. There's one that's just come up, a pizza. There are a whole lot of different things going on. All right, cool. So, we're just gonna move forward. So here are some of the rules of engagement. Again, if you are new here, these are some of the rules that govern the way that we engage in the space. Try as much as possible to stay away from anything that can make inks or marks on the screen, because it does come on my screen as well. So I didn't tell anyone that it's not there, but I do see that some people might be exploring what Zoom is capable of. So please try as much as possible to stay away from pressing things. But our rules of engagement are to please raise your hand if you have a question or a contribution. If you can't raise your hand, you can put some stars in the chat. I will see that. So some stars like this in the chat. I will see that. I will know that you have a question. Or you can just raise your hand and I'll be able to see that you have a question there as well. All right. And then please practice what we call the rule of two. Unfortunately, today I can't practice it with anyone. I'll just have to say what it is, and then hopefully we all get what it is. So it's to allow two people to speak or contribute before you contribute again. That is very important because it ensures that we are not speaking over other people or that we're making other people also feel heard. And then please use your home language. I see we have many different people who come from similar countries. So the hope is at least we will have help in the room to try and translate some of the stuff so that we can all be on the same page. And then lastly, you're more than welcome to use the chat. So you don't have to unmute all the time. I have to unmute, unfortunately, because I'm a host or a placeholder for today's session, but you're more than welcome to use the chat. And then just to kind of apologize for using English mainly as a primary language of communication, but it is our understanding that some people, at least the majority of people, understand, and it's easier for us to communicate, or for me to communicate in this way. So we'll try as much as possible to do the translations where possible, and then we will just see how the session goes. Awesome. So today we're all here because we are looking at building capacity for community-driven climate solutions in the Global South. I'll start maybe by saying what the Global South is, or who the Global South is, or where the Global South is, right? And where the Global South basically is what you would hear people speak about as countries in the global South, in what they call the developing world, or less developed, they'll say things like that. And by there, I'm really just speaking to most people who use Global South versus Global North. So when you think Global South, we're thinking some parts of Asia, we're thinking areas like Brazil, Philippines, Colombia. We're thinking Africa as a whole. So that's what is meant by that term Global South. And when we speak about building capacity for community-driven climate solutions, we know that so many people are coming up with climate solutions, right? We know that we're in a bit of a mess, a little bit of a serious one at that. And for us to be able to find solutions or tackle climate change meaningfully, it has to make sense to us or is that we come from. And so that's essentially what we're looking at when we speak about community-driven climate solutions. And then building capacity. So are people able to do to come up with such solutions? What is the process of coming up with such a solution? And how do people implement those solutions? So those are some of the questions that, we are going to try as much as possible to answer throughout the session. So if you have any questions, please feel free to raise your hand or pop it in the chat. I will be sure to see it. And once I've seen it, we'll maybe have someone in the room who'd like to translate or just answer it, or I will give it a shot. All right. So today, we want to understand what the African and global context looks like and what climate solutions look like, right? So oftentimes you can hear people say renewable energy, which is amazing, or you hear some of these things that we might not have ever seen before to try and tackle things. So like most people believe that technology is going to save us. And the difference is some people are thinking electric vehicles, for instance. But then how does that work for the global majority, right? How does that work for the rest of the world? So those are some of the questions that people often don't respond. Oftentimes people don't have answers to that when they just say, this is what we need. But yeah, so how does that look like? What are the different contexts? What do things look like in Africa? Those are some of the questions. So this whole session is supposed to at least help us properly understand what makes community-driven climate action solutions from looking at what some of these things mean, but also looking at a case study. And we're going to do that a little bit later on in the session. All right. So then we look at the African and the Global South context. We simply put these two as two separate ones, but they're not actually separate. It's more like Africa is in the Global South. So just because a lot of us, I know majority of us are joining from Africa, it would be great to do that separation. So we know that the Global South as a whole, or the African continent, has suffered a history of colonization and underdevelopment by the Global North. So when we speak about the Global North, again, we're speaking about what have been known as superpowers. So we're looking at America, we're looking at China, we're looking at Russia, we're looking at these big nations, Canada, we're looking at France, we're looking at the UK. These big nations have contributed and have participated in the colonization of Africa and other areas in the Global South. And this is very, very important to know and note when we do work in the climate space or in the climate justice space, because they are related, they're interlinked. Unfortunately, where we are right now as a world can be attributed to just give me 1 minute, please. apologies for that. A lot of the mess that we're in from a change perspective is because people were greedy, people colonized, and people decided to hoard and dig up resources while still leaving people, a lot of different people, while leaving them in a state of need and underdevelopment. So we're still kind of trying to rebuild. That's what we're currently trying to do. That's what we've been trying to do for years. We're trying to rebuild and take back control of our own narrative in our own ways and development as well. So when we speak about climate solutions for the global south, we're mainly speaking about solutions that have been developed by people who are in the global south. So when we speak about African solutions, African climate solutions, for instance, we're talking about solutions that have been developed by people who are of African descent, who live in Africa, people who are African, people who identify as African, all these people. That's what makes a solution, I almost want to say, make sense for the people that it's made for. Because think about it, if I'm to make a solution right now, I live in South Africa, and I decide to just make a solution for Uganda, I don't have the context of what Uganda is going through from a climate change perspective. So even if I were to make a really good solution, the question would be, how great is that solution if I don't have all the necessary information for me to be able to do what I am supposed to do, or to drive a proper solution with understanding the needs that are on the ground. So this is what we're trying to do, right? We're trying to take back the narrative. We are saying this is what we know to be right. There have been so many solutions over the years that have been implemented by people through indigenous knowledge, and a lot of that was stripped or taken away during colonialism. But we are getting back to it, which is incredible. You know, there's a saying, again, like I said, I am in South Africa, and there's a saying that says, umtu ngumuntu ngabantu. So a person is a person because of people. And that is a saying that's across the continent. I've just said it in one of the local languages here, but it's a saying that is very, very popular across the continent. That's simply to say that I'm a person because of other people, or because of community. So because of that idea, it means we're prioritizing lives, livelihoods, as well as this idea of a just transition. So if you were in last month's or the previous workshops that we've done, if you've entered those, you would know what a just transition is. So unfortunately, I'm not really going to go too much into it today, but I'm simply going to say it's one of those things that we should be prioritizing. All right. Now, what makes a community-driven climate solution? Like I gave that example of me jumping onto something in a different world altogether and then calling it, you know, the proper solution. That's not quite it. So when we look at a community-driven climate solution, we're looking at the following 4 things, or we can make them 6 depending on really how you look at it. It is led by communal and community experiences and understandings. This simply means that, let's say there's a community in South Africa, or there's a community in Kenya that needs to come up with some solutions. Someone who's coming from Botswana, who lives in Botswana, who's lived in Botswana their whole entire life and has not had the proper understanding of what's happening in Kenya, cannot just come out of nowhere and say, here, I've got a solution for you. When we speak about community experiences, we're talking about people who are in that specific community in Kenya who say, this is what we've gone through. It's not always throughout their whole life, but they can say this is what we've been experiencing. And because of that, we have collectively or communally come up with a proper understanding of the problem. And therefore, we have come up with such a solution, right? So step 1 is that it's a community coming together and realizing that there's work to be done. Step 2 is that one thing that we often don't see when we speak about the environmental movement, like across continents, we don't often see a ground-up approach. So really looking at what's happening in the community fostering these ideas that come from the community and then supporting them. Oftentimes it's people on the top, for lack of a better word, so people like government coming out of nowhere and saying, this is what you need to be doing without properly understanding what's needed. So even from an implementation perspective, always translate. So ground up, again, meaning from the very bottom, like as in from the ground, community driven, from people who are on the ground, who are experiencing some of these issues firsthand, and not some people who are in some high office somewhere or in a totally different community or in a totally different country or a completely different continent who are coming and saying, this is how you should be tackling the problem. All right. And then centering the community. So putting the community, and when we say community, we're really speaking about people, putting people at the very center, right? That's what centering the community speaks to, looking at the impact of some of these issues. So if we're going to be looking at climate solutions, it means that there's a climate problem. And so when we look at the impact of this climate problem, we are then able to assess the loss as well as the damage. So I'll give an example of what's happened a couple of years ago. It might still be very fresh and recent in people's minds, but we saw with Cyclone Idai that came through and impacted so many people in the southern part of Africa. And the loss, people lost so much, right? People lost their livelihoods, people lost a lot, their identities, some people lost family members, people lost dignity, people lost their sense of being, and there was significant damage to the environment as well. So really looking at that and then looking at ways that we can then introduce reform. So how do we then allow these people, how do we create spaces where these people and their community, so it could be the land that they want occupied, how do we then make sure that they're able to cultivate that same land once more and make do with it? So not just saying, okay, and abandoning all of these people and saying, we've done all we could, or, oh, I don't know what should happen. Really looking at how people can then adapt to some of these changes, right? So this issue or this concept of adaptation that we see, there's a term that's called climate adaptation. So when we really look at it in context of climate solutions, we're really looking at how to make communities resilient. And by that, we mean how can they withstand? How can they be able to push against the changes that are coming, right? That are coming because of climate change and climate-related disasters. So how are we able to make sure that communities are strengthened to be able to, even if another cyclone hits, how can we make it less devastating? And how can we make people be able to quickly adapt, right? So quickly adjust to this new environment that they're being faced with. And then lastly, looking at what we call decolonized solutions. Some of the solutions that have been coming up again have been centered around specific context or around specific ideas of what climate change or what climate-related issues are or should look like. We often find that there are these schools of thought that seem to think that Africa is heavily dependent and should always be heavily dependent on other nations for many different reasons, which just is not true. So when we interrogate that, we start looking at what we call decolonized solutions. We start looking at indigenous solutions. We spoke about indigenous solutions earlier. So how were our ancestors dealing with some of the issues? Even if they were dealing with the same issues at a smaller scale, we can still interrogate how then we can make that larger scale, especially with the help of things like technology now that we have and other such things. All right. So that's what makes it a community-driven climate solution. I will just do the next slide, and then we'll just pause for some questions if there are any, and then we will continue on. So when we started here, the topic was around building capacity for community-driven climate solutions. So how do we capacity for the solutions that we've spoken about just now? And the first thing, or on the top of our list, is through education and raising awareness, right? So one of the things that MCA is building capacity through these trainings or these workshops that we have, the Back2Basics workshops. And this is a form of us engaging in education and raising awareness around some of these issues. You'll probably see that later on when we look at the case study, and then I would then get into sort of like an explanation around how that is then relevant. But education, so really taking information, making it digestible, making it simple so that we can all properly understand what is being said or what is needed from us even to participate in some of these solutions, or even how do I go back to my own community and then implement the thing that I have. So education and raising awareness. Number 2 is upskilling. So looking at some of the skills that people have or skills that people do not have, and then creating a space where they can come in and gain more skill or become better at the skill that they already have. So that's what we mean by upskilling. And then advocacy. So advocacy is in a way very much linked to education. So when we speak about advocating for something, we are mostly then speaking about, we're speaking about how people speak about an issue or how people speak about solutions, right? How people raise awareness in a way. So when we say a person is an advocate, we can also look at them almost like as an evangelist. We can look at that person, for lack of a better term, to all the people who are not religious, we can look at that person as an evangelist of whatever topic it is. So if I'm an evangelist for building capacity, I can also look at myself as an advocate for building capacity. And then 4th, through mobilizing and organizing. So rounding up people or speaking to as many people as possible, rounding up people and organizing, especially when we're talking about climate action, so that our voices can be heard. This can include reaching out to news outlets, maybe even radio, speaking about the things that you are doing, the actions that you're taking, and then inviting many people to join you as well, so that you can be able to have a lasting impact. So if you want something that stays from an advocacy perspective, from a mobilizing perspective, you want to make as much noise as you can about it. And so that's where mobilizing and organizing comes into play, specifically around actions. And if we don't make the noise, unfortunately, our voices will not be heard. So that's what we need to be doing. And then solidarity and centering the principles of Ubuntu. So solidarity simply means standing together with. So if we're going to be building capacity, or if I know something and someone else knows something that maybe I don't know, and the thing that I know they don't know, if we stand together and hold hands, we are then able to exchange that information. And that act of exchanging information, understanding that information, and then deciding to support each other based on that information exchanged can be looked at and understood as solidarity. And centering the principles of Ubuntu. I've spoken about Ubuntu already when I said that, there's a very, very popular term on African soil that speaks about how people are people because of other people or because of community. And this is very, very important when we speak about community-focused or community-based actions, because you are having to lean on other people. All right. So I'm just going to pause here for now and ask if there are any questions so far. I don't see any in the chat, but if someone has a question, please feel free to either raise your hand or to pop it in. Right. Do we have any questions so far? We are moving more into our case study because we want to look at a case study to just put a lot of what we've learned so far into context. So what does that mean? What does this even look like when we look at it from a practical perspective? Right. It looks like we are all good and happy to move forward. So I am going to do that. I haven't seen any hands yet. All right, wonderful. I see a thumbs up. Cool. Awesome stuff. All right, so we're going to move on to the next session, which is around, there we go. The next session, which is a case study around exactly what we've been discussing. So we have been discussing community-driven climate solutions in action. We want to look at how some of these case studies or this specific case study can provide some inspiration as well as some practical takeaways for us. Just 1 minute. Right, apologies for that. I needed to make sure that my laptop would not die on me. All right, cool. So community-driven climate solutions, these are just some 3 examples of possible case studies that we could have gone into, but I chose one ultimately that we can get into, figure out what it's about, why it's about that thing, and then, come to a close, potentially, if there aren't any questions, which I think there will be some. So the first one that I came across was the Amazon nut-to-bar cooperatives. The Amazon rainforest, I think a lot of us have heard a lot about what was happening with deforestation in the Amazon rainforest, which also happens to be one of our biggest carbon sinks, which simply means that it's this very big place with so much greenery that it traps a lot of the carbon. So if that carbon is not trapped, then it will be in our atmosphere. And when it's in our atmosphere, it then causes, our environments to become hotter. And we don't want that because that's what climate change does. So slowing down those processes, it also then goes on to interfere as a greenhouse gas, which then interferes with the ozone layer, which is that protective layer around the earth, which ensures that we don't get burnt by the sun, or it doesn't become too hot that we start melting ice caps, or that water in the sea or wherever starts to expand, because when you heat water it expands. So when that happens, then we have rising sea levels. When that happens, especially on the coast, I live on the coast at the moment, when that happens, water starts to come in and claim land, and that's some of the stuff that we don't want, right? So that's a very, very quick sort of overview of what happens with these processes. But the Amazon rainforest nut-to-bar cooperative demonstrates community-driven solutions for sustainable forest management and economic development. In a nutshell, what this is people who are harvesting rainforest in a sustainable and safe way, and then selling it for profit for economic development. So we're looking at indigenous communities who live in the Amazon rainforest. The second one is in the Philippines. It's called Picosol Solar Lamp Project, which is a project in the Philippines that tackles climate change and energy access through a community-driven approach. So Philippines is also a developing nation. It is also in the global south. And what you then find with some of the nations that are in the global south is that there are issues around water access, energy access, and other kinds of access. Could be food access as well. And this specific one speaks to energy access. So it could be having a lamp that works maybe 24/7. That might not always be possible. So then they came up with this idea that's called Picosol Solar Lamp Project, which tackles both climate change crisis as well as the energy access crisis. And then lastly, one called Tree Sisters, which is reforestation in Uganda. Essentially, there was a big problem with deforestation, so the excessive cutting down of trees. And what Tree Sisters aims to do is reforest in Uganda. So replant trees. We see that here it empowers women in Uganda to plant trees and restore degraded land. All right. So what that does, especially when it comes to degraded land, is when it rains, that area that has been deforested, right, where we've now plucked all of the trees out, it now has no way to channel the water even away from maybe where people live or to proper channels. Then we've got these massive floods because we've interrupted the natural state of nature. Okay, so when we reforest, we are in a way attempting to also solve issues like flooding. And so that's what Tree Sisters does through their reforestation projects in Uganda, which specifically looks at empowering women and children or women and girls to plant trees and restore degraded land. All right, so out of all of these, I did choose to focus on Tree Sisters, only because I felt like it'd be great for us to look at something like this. Because deforestation and land degradation are major challenges, not only in Uganda, but across. I know in Malawi, it's also a very big problem. So I thought this was something that we could all very much relate to. Not that all the others we couldn't. I know with Picosol and energy access, that is something that we would all also be able to properly relate to. So Tree Sisters looks at deforestation and land degradation and coming up with solutions against that. As well as impacting agricultural productivity and livelihoods, right? Because we know that from research and from understanding, we know that women are mostly vulnerable as they often manage the land for food security, right? So this then extends to women and children or women and girls. And because of that, there has to be a solution, or there had to be a solution there. And so that's kind of the background around. So this is the problem, essentially. And then the solution is working with women's groups or different women's groups in Uganda to plant native trees. One of the issues that we find with reforestation is some people do it without properly understanding what we can call native plants. So some people can then get involved with planting invasive species that then interrupt the flow or the natural flow of an area. We can see this through them literally spreading like weeds and then killing indigenous plants. So Tree Sisters works to plant native trees, so native to Uganda, right? And provide training in nursery management. So from when this is a seed, how do we cultivate it? How do we make sure that this tree grows into a tree? Then planting techniques, proper planting techniques. When it comes to planting techniques, are the trees is spaced enough? Are the trees when they do grow, because it's not so much just about the seed, it is also about what is going to happen when they grow. And then sustainable land management practices. We know that deforestation is not a sustainable land management practice because it's just taking and taking and taking and leaves the soil bare, leaves the area very, very arid. But now when we look at sustainable land management practices, we're also looking at ways to make sure that this work continues, right? This work of preservation, land preservation continues so that even our children's children can see some of the work that we've put in. And then their children's children can continue to see that work, something that has been happening for years and years and years and years and years in so many different parts of the world. So that is the solution. And then around impact, they contribute, obviously, I mean, we've spoken about this quite a lot, that Tree Sisters contribute to reforestation, but they also look at improved soil fertility, right? So if you're constantly planting in the same place, you are taking away all of the nutrients to the point where if you try to plant again, so if you're consistently planting in the same space for 5 years, and then you want to continue yielding the same amount, or you want to continue getting the same amount in results, it's not always going to be possible because the more you plant in the same space without improving soil fertility, your plants are going to take all of the nutrients there, and without, again, tending to the soil and making sure that it's healthy, you will run into proper problems. As well as, again, increased crop yields. I've spoken about this a little bit. So it means that you have greater food security. We spoke about issues around climate change and things like energy access or like food access. So if there is proper management of the soil, there's improved soil fertility, there is reforestation, or there's people properly understanding sustainable practices, it means that there will be greater food security. There will be more food available for more people for longer periods of time, as well as economic opportunities for women farmers. So because they're making good yield, they are able to sell a lot of their stuff so that they can sustain themselves or their families, or that they may even have leftover after they are finished with a specific the English word has escaped me now, but a specific, you see, when you grow things, and then after you've grown the thing, you take it out of the soil. After they reap the fruits of their work. So these are some of the things, that is the impact that we're looking at. And this is community-based, it's community-driven. We're looking at women, particularly in Uganda. We've looked at the problem, we've looked at the solution. Now we're looking at practical impact, right? And lastly, apart from all of these great benefits like crop yields and food security and economic opportunities for women, we also then see that through this project, tree planting has helped mitigate climate change by reducing or capturing carbon dioxide. So I spoke a little bit earlier about a carbon sink when we were speaking about the Amazon rainforest. Trees act the same way, right? They take the carbon and give us the oxygen that we need, or all other living things. So when we look at how tree planting helps mitigate climate change by that very big word that I'm going to struggle to say now, sequestering carbon dioxide. When we talk about sequestering carbon dioxide, it is the process of storing carbon dioxide in underground geologic formations. So that is one thing that tree planting helps with, slows down or mitigates climate change. I do see those two questions in the chat. If anyone would like to try and answer them, it would be incredible. But if not, I will get to both of those questions a little bit later. So we're already seeing that Tree Sisters, the project focuses specifically on empowering women, which is a vulnerable group, often disproportionately affected by climate change. This simply means that women are almost always the most affected by climate change on many, many different levels. We could look at what happens when a climate disaster strikes. We've seen so many reports of this happening in refugee camps or rescue camps where women have been assaulted in exchange for food or in exchange for shelter. And this has been in the middle of a disaster. So those are some of the things that, make them most vulnerable. When you really look into it, you do a little bit more research, you find that some women have even become abused because of the changes in their environment. So if we're looking at rural Africa, we saw this in South Africa in one study that was done in rural South Africa, I think in the KZN area. And it was that when there was a drought and women could not fetch water, their husbands would come back from work, mostly mad, and some of them would go the extent of beating their wives because they couldn't find any water, without properly understanding that because of the drought, there was no water to fetch. And so women then become extremely vulnerable, and oftentimes with their children as well. So that's where the empowerment there comes into play. And I am going to pause here for a minute and just see if anyone would like to take some of the questions that we've seen in the chat there. I see the first question says, how is it possible to stop climate change or reduce climate change if almost everyone contributes to climate change either positively or negatively? Is there anyone in the room who would like to help us with that answer? And then the second one is, how can we tell farmers or those in agriculture that deforestation contributes a lot to climate change because they can't do agriculture and farming without deforestation? I see Leila has attempted to answer that and says, I would believe that when you remove something from the earth, you have to replace or substitute through replanting or depending on the farming methods. So thank you for that, Leila. I don't want to add too much to that, but I am keen to see if other people would like to engage with those two questions, even if it's just sharing our thoughts around what's been happening here. And then we've got Claire, who's asking, as Tree Sisters, the UK-based charity, can you say more about how international organizations relate to community-based climate solutions? Absolutely. I think I can start with that while I just wait for people to engage with those two first questions. So how can international organizations relate to community-based climate solutions? One thing that we see often is that there is obviously work that's being done around adaptation. So how do we make communities adapt to climate-related disasters or even events that can take place around them? How do we make sure that communities are able to do that? How can we make sure that communities are able to engage in even sharing some of their solutions? And what we find is that sometimes there's not easy access to resources such as funds, such as information, such as group people. And so what I've seen, so I can speak from an I perspective, what I've seen is that sometimes international organizations come with some of the resources that are needed for this work to go forward. Now, the challenge comes in where international organizations come in and they have a proper idea of how something is to be done according to themselves and then ignore the people on the ground. A more sustainable approach would be to come into communities or go to communities, consult communities around their needs, and then support what comes out of that. So that's how international organizations can relate to community-based climate solutions, is through resources, supporting the work that needs to be done on the ground, and not so much saying this is what needs to be done and this is how it's going to be done, because that's what we've seen become a problem in the past, which meant that some of the community-based climate solutions were not truly community-based. They were then climate solutions, yes, maybe, but they were not community-based. They were sort of, what's the word? Prescribed. It was almost like you need to do this, which has not always worked. I hope I've done that question justice, Claire. And if I have not, please let me know. Right, and then coming back to Albert's question, the first question around how it's possible to stop climate change or reduce climate change if almost everyone is contributing to climate change either positively or negatively. So a lot of the work that we do around climate change, climate mitigation, climate adaptation is so from an African Climate Alliance perspective, it's to raise awareness and educate around issues around climate change. So when we speak about climate change, we are talking about what it is and how it affects people. Once we've properly understood that, we then know that there's a part for everyone to play. We would hope, it would be amazing if everyone could get involved in the fight for climate justice. However, it's not always possible for many different reasons, including some politicians just choose not to engage. Some people are too old to care. And again, I'm speaking about politicians too old to care, so they just don't. Governments sometimes do not listen to communities, and other people who have the power and resources often ignore people. So it's only possible for us to do the work that's needed to reduce the impact of climate change if people come together and start working toward ensuring that we can start implementing these solutions in different ways. Like we've spoken now about Tree Sisters in Uganda, looking at how reforestation is happening and some of the benefits that are coming out of these reforestation efforts. So, yeah, don't ever make the mistake of thinking that people cannot do something because there's too many people not doing anything. That's part of the problem. And don't ever think that you cannot do something because it's too big. Any small contribution to ensuring that climate change impacts are reduced is very, very important. And everyone should understand that if they take action, even if it is to raise their voice around the things that are happening in their communities, as it relates to their environment, it is very, very, very important. And it can see so much change coming to those communities through even one person starting. So I hope I've answered that question. And then the second question, how can we tell farmers or those in agriculture that deforestation contributes a lot to climate change because they can't do agriculture and farming without deforestation? So when we speak about deforestation, specifically large-scale deforestation, we're speaking about these big companies that come in and they cut down all of our trees. And when they've done that, it means that we don't have any trees left. And when we don't have many trees left, we get into a problem like some of the problems that I've already outlined around flooding and our catchment systems being impacted. So it's not so much telling farmers or those in agriculture that they should not be farming or that they should not be getting involved with agriculture. It's more really about looking at how can we farm, how can we participate in sustainable ways. So in ways that give back to the land, in ways that protect the land, in ways that understand the importance of the land, the importance of preservation. So it's not so much saying don't farm at all, because there are areas and lands that are specifically designed for farming. And if we look at deforestation at the scale that we often do, we're looking at people who are coming in. Just a reminder to please stay on mute. And if you'd like to be unmuted, please raise your hand first. Apologize, I've lost my train of thought. But in conclusion, we're not saying that they can't do agriculture, that they should not be farming. We're simply saying that we need, all of us, I mean, the whole entire world, we need to start engaging in more sustainable farming or agricultural practices. Right, then I see Kyra Andrews. Your hand is up. Go ahead.
Hello, everyone. I'm Andrews speaking from Ghana, my details. I suggest, please, am I loud?
I'm struggling to hear you a little bit.
Okay. Hello.
Yes, can you speak just a little bit louder?
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, that's perfect.
Yeah, my name is Trey Andrews speaking from Ghana, and I want to suggest some of the ways we can actually educate farmers on deforestation. There are a lot of other sustainable farming methods, like subsistence farming methods, where we don't necessarily cut down the trees, but we plant alongside them. And then there are a lot of farming methods that actually can really help sustainably. We can actually reduce the use of harmful agrochemicals and all those stuff. And then looking at deforestation, we are looking at it in a large scale. For instance, some coming here in Ghana, due to mining, a lot of cocoa producers offer their lands for them to be cut down because these companies pay them a lot and then assure them that once we mine gold here, you're going to have your land back. We are going to do it well for you. So you take this amount, and then they cut down all these cocoa trees, which actually make a lot of income to the country. So there's a need for us to let farmers know, and then looking at some of the impacts of climate change coming on, these rising temperatures and low rainfall. All these are evidences that we can actually relate to them and tell them this is what is really happening. This is due to deforestation and other activities. So to actually put out your part or your quota in trying to fight climate change, you should reduce deforestation, or you should not offer your land and then other resources for industries or companies because of what they offer. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. I'm not even going to add anything because I think that was incredible and you've said it all. Thank you so much for sharing that and sharing how people can, those solutions. And then back to the chat, there is Everest saying, based on the Nairobi Declaration from the recent African Climate Summit in Nairobi, what I see arising most is all on funding to help curb climate change. Is there ways the heads can rethink the decision and at least involve Africans in mitigating climate change other than begging for funds always? Yeah, that is. Remember when we started, there was a big disclaimer around how we can workshop some of these things by themselves. This is one of them, Everest. But I'm sure there are ways. I know that there is sort of like a global conversation around this issue of funding, particularly for African countries. How can we fund climate solutions in a way that makes sense? So when you look at some of the funds that have been introduced, they've been in the form of debts, right? So we already know that a lot of African nations, or Africa in general, is in a lot of debt, and they owe so much to the global north or to developed nations. And so a new tactic that these people have come up with is, if we give you more money, you will owe us. And when they give that money, it comes at incredibly high interest rates. So all of these are still problems. So I'm just adding on to some of the problems you've mentioned. And other ways that we can get the heads of state to rethink some of these decisions and involve Africans in mitigating climate change. I think that's what a lot of people, a lot of activists, a lot of organizations are also pushing for. The fact that Africans know how to get into mitigating and how the best ways for us to adapt to some of the changes that are coming because of climate change. We have some of the solutions. The only problem is we don't have a lot of resources. I do find that sometimes when you collaborate, so you collaborate with other like-minded projects, it could be collaborating with other organizations, even across the world. It's always useful, because that way there's more of you, or more of us rather, calling for a change. Unfortunately, we do have, across the world, we still have a lot of corruption. We have a lot of ignorance around the issues that we are being faced with, especially when we look at people on the ground. And so it's going to be extremely difficult. But I think continuing to call for such funds, continuing to call for an adaptation fund, which should be easily accessible, because oftentimes, even if there is a fund that we're not begging for and it's available for application, it's not always easy to apply for because of all the red tape, or because we're always looked at funny. So I don't have a proper answer for that, unfortunately. But if someone in the room has, please help me and Everest come up with that answer. And then I see Palesa adding on to the farming question, that an alternative way of farming is hydroponics. Absolutely. Would you mind telling us more about hydroponics? Even if it's in the chat, you're more than welcome. Wonderful. So if there are any other questions, please pop them in the chat. Otherwise, we are going to swiftly move forward to the part that I dislike most. And it's this part where we come to a conclusion about everything that we've learned. So we've been here for a little over an hour now. But yeah, unfortunately, we have to come to a conclusion. There's been so much that's come out, so many really meaningful things that have been shared, which has been great. Kayo, is that a new hand or is that an old hand? If it's an old hand, you're more than welcome to drop it. If it's a new hand, I will get to it later on. But yes, we are here now drawing closer and closer to our conclusion. So everything that we've learned, we started with looking at building community-based solutions, building capacity for community-based solutions for climate change and what that was. So we looked at what was building capacity, different ways that capacity can be built. And then we looked at a case study of Tree Sisters in Uganda, which is a reforestation project that aims to empower women and children. Right. So some key takeaways. These are some of my key takeaways. I've already heard some more that were shared in the chat, which I think is wonderful. But I'm just gonna look at these, and then from there we can maybe move more into a close a little bit, and then and then we see like way forward a little bit and leave us with a little bit more time for discussion if we would like to get into a bit of a discussion. So from that specific case study that we looked at, what I came out from that was the importance of focusing on empowering women in climate solutions, because sometimes it's not always like a specific focus. It would be amazing to see more projects that focus specifically on empowering women, especially in different parts of not only the continent, but other areas in the global south. And then how important building capacity for sustainable land management practices within communities is. We've already heard some questions around how can we then tell farmers and other people who get involved with agriculture to stop deforestation. And what we really are speaking about is how do we get people involved with sustainable land management practices so that we're preserving the land and that we are engaging in sustainable practices, right? And then addressing climate change through nature-based solutions like tree planting. It's not always, again, like I said at the beginning, it is not always an electric vehicle that is needed as you mentioned. It's not always that. It's also not always, distributing iPads so that everyone has an iPad. It's not. We know this, we've seen this. But through nature-based solutions such as tree planting or community-based solutions or solutions that really speak to some of the issues that we're seeing with the project that I spoke about in the Philippines with energy access, really looking at what is the issue? The issue is that people don't have light, specifically at night. So how do we make sure that we can harness the sun to give us light at night? And how does that benefit the community? How can we get more of the community members involved in such work? So really many different ways that climate change can be addressed or climate-related issues can be addressed, and many different ways that we can come up with such solutions. The important thing is to look at community-based solutions, even if we do get support from other charities, or if we get support from other organizations that might not necessarily be in the global south. And then the link between climate action, food security, energy security, as well as economic empowerment for women specifically. So those were some of the takeaways that I got from simply being in this session. I see so many questions in the chat. Please give me 1 minute and I will get to them. All right. So we have essentially come to the end of our workshop. I don't know if anyone has any other question. I see there's a question in the chat around whether or not there's a WhatsApp group where we can share ideas and information. And we do have a group for activists in Africa. It's an activist network. I will share the African Climate Alliance website. So on this website, I'll actually just share my screen so that everyone can see exactly what I'm doing. So on our website is right. Our website is africanclimatealliance.org. So when you go onto the website, you can come to get involved. When you click on get involved and you scroll at the very, very bottom, you've got here where it says join our activist network. So if you're under 35 and you'd like to connect with climate activists from across the continent, please sign up. You just need to put your email address here and your last name, and then you subscribe, and then you fill in your details on how you would like to get involved. So the people who've asked if there is a WhatsApp group, please go ahead and fill out your information, including your phone number. And then once we have this information, we will be able to, and then you click sign up, we will be able to add you to those WhatsApp groups that you're asking about. So I think I'll just share the link here as well so that everyone has it. Please be sure to, there we go. Please be sure to fill out that information so that we can get back to you. We can add you to these groups. If you don't do that, there's absolutely no way we're going to be able to know that you want to be added to some of these groups. All right. And then because we are nearing the very, 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 very end, we are going to do a small checkout. So the checkout being one thing that you took away from the session. So please put it in the chat. So what is one thing that you took away from the session? And then what's a feeling word? A word that describes how you're feeling right now. And then one thing you're looking forward to doing this week. So there's an example, Emily. This is for the last session, who learned about conferences on issues of justice are useful when done right. They were hopeful and they were looking forward to painting. So what is your name and one thing you took away from this session, and what's a feeling word? Right, so while people are filling that out, I just caught this message now from Claire asking, do you think it's useful for communities to document, monitor, and evaluate projects that they work on? Why or why not? Personally, I think it's extremely important. If you're working on a project, you need to monitor and evaluate it for many different reasons. One of the main reasons that you probably hear from people is that you need to be able to show evidence of the work to funders. And when you're able to do that, you're able to say, this is what we were able to do. This is how we were able to do it. And this is how we were able to see the change. So you have to have sort of targets that you're looking at. You're saying, if this happens, then this is supposed to be the results. And then when you're monitoring or you're evaluating your projects, you're then able to see that because of these systems that we put in place, these were the results that we were able to achieve. And when you do that, you are able to also, not even just for the funder, but you're also able to properly evaluate and update your project as needed. So improve it, refine it. If it's a project around tree planting, for instance, we want to see that the next rain season, is it going to flood or not? And if it doesn't flood, then great. If it does flood, is it as bad as it was previously? So those are just really like other examples, but I definitely think it's extremely useful for communities to document. Oftentimes you get people tell you how to document, but I think the best way to start documenting is by doing it the way that you do it. So not so much the way that other people would want for you to do it, but doing it the way that you do it. So it's absolutely important. All right. Are there any other questions as we move toward the close? Okay, I see so many people sharing some of the things that they took away. Thank you so much. Please continue doing that in the chat. And then because we are about to close, very much about to close, don't go without doing some of these things. So if you have any questions related to what we just learned today, please email us at education@africanclimatealliance.org. Have general inquiries, so not necessarily education specific, but if they're related to African Climate Alliance in any way, please email team@africanclimatealliance.org. And then I've shared now the link multiple times in the group, but visit us at africanclimatealliance.org. And then there's a data reimbursement form. I am going to pop the reimbursement form in the chat in a bit, but that is it. If you plan on requesting data from us for some of these sessions or these sessions specifically, please do so within the first 2 days. So do it today or tomorrow after attending a session, and then fill out the form with the name you registered for the session with. So if you, I see there's Raphael, if you decide that you go by a second name, maybe your second name is Stephen, and you fill out the form with your second name, Stephen, we won't know who Stephen is. So please stick to the name that you joined the session with. Like Raphael, if you're going to fill out the data reimbursement form, you're going to put Raphael down. So please, it's very important. If you don't do that, we won't be able to verify that you attended the session and you won't be able to get data reimbursement. So try as much as possible to make sure that you do that. If you have any other questions, any questions at all, you let us know and we will get in touch with you regarding those questions. So I did promise that link. So there's the data reimbursement form. For those who wanted the email address, I've also popped it there. So please make sure that you fill that out before the sort of the day ends, or tomorrow at least. If you don't do that, we won't be able to give you the data. All right. Are there any other questions before we officially come to a close? If you are still popping questions in the chat or your insights, what you took away from the session, that's incredible. Please continue to do so. And then reminder that on Wednesday, same time, we are going to be discussing, okay? We are going to be discussing with some people who do this work. Today, we're just looking at building capacity for community action or for community-based solutions. On Wednesday, we'll be looking at strategies to empower communities in the Global South or in Africa to develop and implement their own climate solutions. All right. So that's going to be extremely interesting. Please make sure you sign up. If you have not signed up for this one, then yeah, I'm not sure that you're going to be here. So I'm going to pop this link as well in the chat to make sure that we all have it. So this is the link for Wednesday's session. For Wednesday's session. That's the link for Wednesday's session. So please make sure that you register for that. The link for the data reimbursement form, I've popped in the chat again, just so that everyone can follow. There's several administrative things that we have to do. I just need to show you the reimbursement form. So this is what it looks like. you will put your first name or the name you joined with and your last name, the phone number starting with your country code. So here I would put Michelle, my surname, my phone number, because I'm in South Africa, starts with +27, and then I will move on to fill out the rest of it. Network, mine is Telkom, and then current date would be today's date. So here I will come here, choose today's date, which is the 25th. And then I will say I am in South Africa. What was the workshop? The workshop was Back to Basics. And then I'll submit. So if you don't do that process, we won't have your details. I've shared the link in the chat. Please make sure that you have access to it. And please make sure you fill it out for data. Right. I have shared the link various times. Please, please, please. There we go. I've shared it in the chat. Please make sure you get that before we leave. Can everyone see it now? Yes. All right. I see people have received the link. Please make sure you fill it out. And then the link for Wednesday's session, I've also popped it in the chat again. And then lastly, our contact information. There we go, with our email address and everything. So thank you so much, everyone, for coming through to today's workshop. Really, really do appreciate it. And we hope to see you in the next workshop. We also hope that you will keep well until then. Unfortunately, this is the time where we have to say goodbye. I see, and I'm so, so pleased that there's still 80 of us on the call. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you so much for being so engaging. And go ahead and enjoy the rest of your night.